Jason with Chicago News, and this week we've got the 2018 Prius C4, which we'll explain in a minute. This is a small city-focused hybrid that you can use to get around the city and save gas. It's pretty clear looking under this hood that not a lot of people care what's under here. Normally, when we get a press car, it's been cleaned and detailed under the hood. This one doesn't look like anyone's probably ever cleaned it. And the reason for that is no one really buys a Prius for the engine. You know, they're looking for efficiency. But here we've got a 1.5 liter 4-cylinder and a hybrid electric drive system. 99 horsepower is the rating. Don't you think there was one thing they could do to make it actually tick over to 100 horsepower? But ultimately, this powertrain is what gives this both great fuel mileage and, unfortunately, lackluster performance. Now I'm 6'3", which is actually a handy guide to show you just how small this car is. And having a small car in the city is great, but that being said, there is a lack of space on the inside here. We'll get to that in a moment when we hop inside. But for now, let's just say that this is actually not the ugliest Prius. The full-size Prius, especially the newest one with the really odd rear taillights, just is an odd-looking car. This actually looks more like an average small hatchback. First thing you notice when driving this Prius C is that the suspension is a little bit firm and the drivetrain is a little bit buzzy. You know, electric cars, or purely EVs, are very smooth, have a lot of torque, you know, and because there's no engine vibration, they have a more luxurious feel. This feels a little bit cheaper and tinnier from a driving perspective. Now, you do notice the electric portion of the drivetrain kicking in, and you hear the whine of the motor. Sometimes you hear the whine of that generator doing the regenerative braking when you're slowing down. So you get some indicators of the driveline, but ultimately this drives more like a regular gas vehicle than it does any sort of electric vehicle. You know, the Prius was one of the first hybrid vehicles to come out, and they've really stuck to the same, they call hybrid synergy drive with all Prius models. And, you know, now that technology has been advancing, this is actually starting to get to be one of the more dated hybrid setups. A lot of competitors in not just the small city hybrid class, but, you know, in all different classes of hybrids and crossovers, even plug-in hybrids, have a much better driveline system than this Prius does. Obviously, the Prius name is very well known. If you're going to get a hybrid, it's a name that kind of comes up right away, which is why Toyota actually created all these different sizes of Prius that you can get. This Prius C version, which might stand for city, might stand for compact, no one can really tell. Tell us what you think it means in the comments below. But this Prius C is kind of tailored for the city. It's small, easy to park. It gets better fuel mileage in the city. That's the one thing about this driveline system, is because every time you step on the brakes, you're generating battery power. This thing actually really gets better mileage in the city than it does on the highway. You might be asking, why don't I just get a fully electric vehicle? And you might actually be right. If you just drive around the city and never have to take a road trip, a fully electric vehicle is going to be the more efficient option, and it is going to save you more on energy costs than this. But let's say once a week you have to take a decently long road trip for work, or you like to be able to hop in the car and go visit family 300, 400, 500 miles away. This gives you really good fuel mileage around the city, but then you can put a tank of gas in it and make a trip like that. So there is definitely still a market for a system like this over a full EV. We're on the highway now, and I'm going to test out what this Prius was really designed for. We're going to get in the left lane, and we're going to drive as slowly as possible. I'm taking care to make sure that I'm under the speed limit. I don't want to exceed that. That's definitely something you don't want to do in a Prius. Wow, this is what it feels like to be that guy, I guess. You can tell over those bumps just how harsh this suspension is, shaking the camera and everything, you know. This is obviously not a luxury vehicle, but, you know, if you're going to use this in the city, you're going to be driving on some really bumpy, pothole-filled roads, so I would have expected the suspension to be a little bit more compliant than this. One nice feature when you're really looking to save as much fuel as possible is there's a gauge here that shows you how eco-friendly your current driving is, and it even gives you a fuel cost from the time you started the vehicle, or with the trip meter it'll tell you, you know, how much you spent on fuel over a distance. So right now we've driven 570 miles and we've only used $36 in gas. So again, you really can save a lot of money on gas driving a vehicle like this. There just are a lot of other options out there. Speaking of other options, so let's mention a couple of these other options. You know, you could go with something that's not a hybrid, something like the Honda Civic, get way more features than you get in this Prius at essentially the same price. Sure, your mileage is going to suffer a little bit, but you're going to get a whole lot more content, a little bit more space inside the car, lots of other benefits. But then something like the Kia Niro, you actually do get a hybrid version. You can get one that's got all the features you could ever want from a vehicle. Nothing is missing, and it has a better warranty, and it's the same cost. So, you know, for this test vehicle here we're driving is $25,000. You know, that feels like a lot of money for such a small vehicle that actually has a pretty cheap feel overall. So some other weird things on the interior here. The start button is one of them. It's actually hidden right behind the windshield washer stalk. It's actually kind of hard to get to. You got to reach around all of the controls to get to the start button, but the hazard switch is right here. You know, I feel like the hazard switch could be further away and the start button could be kind of more where the hazard switch is. It's like one of those things where it feels like they really didn't put a lot of thought into these controls when they designed them. And again, as we've talked about with many times with Toyota, you've got all these warning lights that tell you things that are on instead of things that are off. So right now the passenger airbag is on, and there's just this glaringly bright light that's next to the LCD that's showing you that the passenger airbag is on. It's just not necessary. You'd want a notification if it were off, but I guess I would always assume that if you're driving a car and there's a passenger, the passenger airbag is going to be on. It's just an unnecessary light. It's kind of distracting. It looks like a warning light, like something's broken, but it's just telling you that the airbag is on. As far as design goes on the interior, there's a bit of a funky look here. Again, with Prius, I often feel like Toyota's going for a funkier design because they want it to look modern and futuristic, but a lot of times it just ends up looking weird. This Prius C is a little less weird looking inside than the normal Prius is, but you still have some weird features. This auto climate control with a very large knob here and a sort of weird triangular display. You've got some buttons that are matte black and then some that are gloss black. It looks kind of disjointed where these things don't even really look like they belong together. I will say that part of the number 4 package, Prius 4, Prius C4, whatever you want to call it, are these soft touch seats, and they are very nice. This is not leather, but it has the feel of a nice supple leather, so it's a really nice material that they've used for this. But ultimately, there's not a ton of feature difference between the Prius 1, 2, 3, and 4 when you really look at it. Especially if you're just driving around the city. The Prius 1 comes with no cruise control, which isn't that big a deal for the city. It comes with cloth seats and a couple other things, but it starts at just over $20,000 instead of $25,000, and it seems like that's more in line what I would expect to pay for something like this. This is an outgoing 2018 model. For 2019, they're actually simplifying things. Instead of having 4 designations of Prius C, it's just going to be 2, but then you can get different options. So they're kind of going a little bit more conventional with the naming and the option packages that you can get for these Prius. For 2019, it's going back to just L and LE, which should be very familiar for most Toyota owners. For a car that really has its roots in technology, this is supposed to be technologically advanced. Some of the tech is really lacking inside here. This infotainment system has a really small screen, but also just not very good functionality, and there's only one USB port, and it doesn't really have enough juice to properly charge your phone. So ultimately, you'd want a lot more tech integration. You'd want to be able to charge your devices you know, people that buy a car like this are going to be into technology. So it's a bit of a disappointment that this isn't very tech focused. Now, even the Prius 1 comes with Toyota Safety Sense. There's a couple different levels of the Safety Sense package, but ultimately you get forward collision alert and emergency braking mainly, but you don't get blind spot monitors, lane assist, a lot of the other things that some of the competitors or some of the other options we've mentioned will come with. Also, this package 4 is supposed to have the premium audio option, but there's really nothing that premium about this audio. It doesn't sound very good at all. I'd be scared to listen to the bass audio, to be honest with you. The headlights are quite bright, which is great on a dark road, but we were getting a lot of people flashing going the other direction thinking that we had our brights on. Another thing we just find strange is that this has auto high beams that you can turn on and off, which I will add that the biggest switch in this whole vehicle is the switch to turn the auto high beams on and off, which also just a bit of an odd choice, but it's got auto high beams that you can turn on, but it doesn't have automatic lights. In other words, you have to manually turn the lights on. Not sure why they would not just integrate automatic lighting with the automatic high beams. So there's an EV only mode you can put this in. We're in that right now. Again, the powertrain is really loud even for an EV. But the other thing is it doesn't take much acceleration to kick it out of EV mode. It gives you a warning, excessive acceleration. I don't know who decided that was excessive. It didn't feel that excessive to me. I'm actually really glad that we reviewed this Prius C today because I'm going to the dentist later, and for some reason spending time with this car made that not seem so bad in the future. In all seriousness though, this is a car for a very specific purpose, and that is just getting around the city. But what it gives you is the option to get on the highway and take a long road trip if you need to, which is what kind of sets it apart from a fully electric vehicle. Unfortunately though, there's so many great competitors and other types of vehicles in the same price range that have a lot more features, a lot more versatility, that makes this a hard one to choose. Except don't buy it. Better cars to buy than this. Done.